Assalamu alaikum, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. I'm your host, Hannah Zaberi, and you're watching us on Muslim Network TV. Muslim Network TV broadcasts 24/7 on Galaxy 19 satellite, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. Today, our topic is going to be Palestine. There have been a lot of new developments that have been happening in the past month, and we are really excited today to welcome our guest, Mohamad Habehh, who is with American Muslims for Palestine. And we're going to be catching up with him about the developments, getting American Muslims for Palestine's response, how Palestinians in the Holy Land are responding to what is happening around them in the Arab world, and also what we here in the United States can do to make sure we're giving our best to Palestinian advocacy. Thank you so much, Mohamad, for being here today. And how are you doing? How's everything been for you?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me. It doesn't feel that long ago that we were here for another reason.
Yes.
And it's great to be back, and I'm really glad that you guys and JFA Now is willing to cover these important topics. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Now you have been, just a little reminder for our audience, Mohamad is a Palestinian American community organizer, and he's been working, he serves as the National Development Coordinator for American Muslims for Palestine, which is a national organization here in the United States. So Mohamad, many of us have been watching what is happening currently with UAE and Israel, with apprehension, disgust. We've seen heartbreak. I've seen all sorts of reactions, and some folks are actually looking at this like, okay, we expected this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to ask your perspective. Can you share with us? Let's go back and actually talk about what has transpired in regards to UAE and Israel relations.
Of course. And I think you hit the nail on the head right there when you said that, some people aren't surprised. And of course, even if you're not surprised, there is still a large amount of disappointment in what we're seeing now. At the last time we were out here, the last time I was with you guys, we talked about the annexation plans in the West Bank. And many of us know that the reason why the UAE was able to come out with this deal and come out with this announcement in the time that it did was because of the annexation plans. Initially, the UAE deal was basically a pledge to come out in the open with these new ideas of economic and security coordination between the two countries. The UAE, of course, has had a relationship with Israel for over 2 decades now. Whether it had been under the books, whether it had been only for security, it has been known that the UAE and Mohammed bin Zayed, their current leader, have had this idea of bringing this relationship with Israel to the forefront. And initially, when this announcement came out, there wasn't any teeth to it. There wasn't anything clearly stated of what these countries were going to be doing together. Mm-hmm. We already knew the relationship that they had in the past with their security coordination and their different dealings. Many of us know that the UAE has had a policy of allowing Israelis to come to the UAE. Israeli ministers had come to the UAE multiple times in the past. And now with their relationship with Trump and their relationship with Kushner, it was easier to bring this deal out. And the perfect excuse came up for them by saying that the reason why we're going to make this deal is to suspend the annexation. And the day they announced this, the day they said that the reason we don't want to do this is because we don't want the West Bank to be annexed, Israel came out and said, you know what? We're suspending it, but we're still going to do this.
Mm.
Netanyahu still came out and he gave a nice long speech about his respect for America, and that at the end of the day, he's always going to do what's best for Israel.
Israel.
He said that at the end of the day, we're still going to annex the West Bank. We're still going to do what we promised because we're not going to stop this for anything. And it's very telling, even in this relationship where the UAE is trying to show that they're an equal partner. Israel was quick to show that they're not. Israel was quick to show that at the end of the day, we're going to have a relationship on our terms and only our terms.
And can you talk a little bit about, I know there was an arms deal that was part of this equation as well. Can you share with the audience what exactly was the arms deal angle?
So many of us understand that one of the reasons why the UAE and some of the other Gulf countries believe that they need to cozy up to Israel is because of their standing right now with Iran. They believe that to be able to deal with Iran and to deal with the problems of Iran, they need to be better equipped and have better allies in the region. Unfortunately, by dealing with Israel, one of the things that they're looking for is to be able to get more arms. And of course, they've been buying for years now from America, but there's only a certain limit that comes up when dealing with America. One of the things that I found very interesting is that they were looking for certain types of planes, different types of helicopters and things like that. But one of the deals was for the F-35s. And Israel was very quick to say that the UAE cannot have those.
Oh, wow.
They're trying to get the best in line material, and Israel's already been rejecting a lot of them, which has been bothering the UAE very much. But at the same time, the security coordination is taking a new level. There was an announcement earlier last week where they announced that they were going to be building a security base for Israel in the UAE in the Yemeni island of Socotra. And this is something that's coming to fruition now as we speak. So
it's in all of this. So at the end of the day, what does UAE get out of this? They're not getting their F-36, F-35 deal is being hindered. What are they getting out of this announcement?
So right now, the UAE was in a bit of hot water with the US because of their dealings with China. As we know, the bigger picture on the foreign policy scale right now is that the US and China haven't had good relations all over the world. And now that the UAE and China were cozying up together, the only way for the UAE to make sure that they don't lose this relationship with America is to essentially do this three-party deal, which would make it easier for America to use some of their ports, which would make it easier for them to allow the current U.S. president to show off that he created some sort of peace deal. But the biggest thing for the UAE is the economic side of this. Obviously, security is important to them, but being able to have a deal with Israel and cozying up more to America, being considered a strong ally, some of the rhetoric that was used with the UAE was very strong, considering them a very strong, helpful ally. So definitely, they're benefiting from it on a propaganda side, but the economic assistance that they're getting out of this is going to be important for them. So now that they have an open trading and open deals with Israel, they're going to be able to make money. I'm sure they're going to become a tourist destination. The UAE actually has one of the largest synagogues in the Middle East, so they've made the country very welcoming. So we're seeing that this might be a very good economic opportunity for them as well, and most likely it will be.
Now, Palestinians have obviously condemned the deal as a stab in the back from a major some may have considered a major player, a major Arab backer. There are still people who are naive enough to think that the UAE is for the Palestinians, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what have you heard from the ground? What sort of responses have you seen?
Definitely, the main thing is that as Palestinians, we're trying to, one, continue our existence, face our oppressor, face the oppression that we're going through. And at the same time, we're seeing people who are supposedly on our side, who are supposedly claiming that the reason why they're going to hurt us and go against us is for our own benefit, doing this to us. So it creates a large amount of distrust and a large amount of hurt on the Palestinian side. The Palestinians, of course, whether it be the PA or the Palestinians who are just on the ground, have been trying to fight off the annexation. And we're sitting here trying to deal with annexation. The PA has cut security coordination and different things with Israel to try to stop annexation and to try to curb it to a certain extent. And here we see an Arab country coming out and rewarding them by giving them this free photo op, and giving them the image that they want. Like, you know what? The only people who can't really get along with Israel are the Palestinians. Everyone else did it. And it's important to note, Israel is the UAE isn't the first country to open a relationship with Israel. Egypt has done it before, and Jordan has done it before. But the difference was that Jordan and Egypt had both fought Israel to a certain extent. They've participated in wars. Egypt, multiple wars against Israel when Israel attempted to occupy and attack Egypt in the multiple wars, which led to their eventual peace deal. But that peace deal wasn't accepted by the Egyptian people. The Egyptian people stood against it, protested against it. Same thing happened when Jordan did it. The people stood against it. The people still stand against it. In Jordan, some Jordanian ministers and different people in Jordan have stood against the current deal going on right now in the UAE. But what makes the UAE deal a bit special is that the UAE has never fought Israel. Yeah. No Emiratis, no people from the UAE, from the Emirates have ever come out and fought and stood against Israel like that, like the countries around them have, Jordan and Egypt. So it's very weird to call it a peace deal when there was never war to start with.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a very that's a deep point, because so what is it making it sound, again, the narrative? The narrative is the peaceful Arabs versus the bad Arabs, right? Like that, and this is part of that whole. And we see this around the world, where Muslims are put into these labels, these boxes, that these are the good Muslims versus the radicals. So this is part of that same narrative. And so now UAE is considered the good Arab. So
yes, exactly. And it's horrible to see, but it's something that's been perpetuated for a while. And what makes the UAE deal as well a bit interesting is that the Gulf and the Arab League had initiatives in the past to start building relationships with Israel. So the Gulf started building relationships with Israel after the signing of the Oslo Agreement back in the early 90s. And so that's when they started their security coordinations. They started under the table deals with Israel and things like that. After 2000 and 2002, the Arab League talked about certain initiatives they could do to start building a relationship with Israel. And their key was that they would allow any Arab country that wished to build a relationship with Israel, as long as Israel was willing to leave the West Bank and go back to the 1967 borders. Of course, the Palestinians weren't very supportive of this, but it was a deal that was offered, and Israel refused it. Israel refused it in the beginning, and until this day, I'm sure they would still refuse this type of deal, which has been reaffirmed twice since it started about 18 years ago. This was an offer given by the Arab League. What we're seeing now from the UAE is they've even given up on that deal, which was a deal that didn't even look that good itself. The UAE has given off on that deal and has decided on their own that they're going to build a relationship no matter who likes it or who's against it.
Mm.
We've also seen that the UAE is now trying to bring other Arab countries in, and the US is trying to bring other Arab countries in.
Yes,
Mike
with the meeting with Kushner and Qatar, and that also seemed to, even though UAE and Qatar are at opposite ends in the Arab spectrum, in the Middle Eastern spectrum, they are quite frankly enemies. But this was very interesting to watch, that their reaction, or they were also talking normalization.
Mhm. So Qatar might be on the longer list.
Mm-hmm.
They have definitely a shorter list that they expect people to start signing on sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
One of the countries, Sudan, Mike Pompeo recently met with the heads of Sudan
Mm-hmm.
and talked to them about the possibility of signing a similar agreement. We also see countries like Bahrain, countries like Oman, who would also be interested in something like this. Bahrain and Oman both supported the deal, came out and congratulated the UAE for coming to it. So we might see it with a few of the smaller players within the region. But I do think we're not far off from seeing something similar coming out from Saudi. Even though Saudi was the first country to support the initial 2002 initiative, and they were the ones who started it, they could also possibly fall into this. But I
And
think
that's because of the new leadership in Saudi, right? The
yes.
leadership has changed, the tone has changed, a lot has changed. And at least there used to be a facade of that the previous Saudi leadership, of Ummah leadership and the Ummah and all of that. But with this, with MBS, that facade has come off, and it's and allow people can see what the real story is in Saudi. And even with this, when Kushner met with Sheikh Tamim of Qatar, they have said that they remain committed to the 2002 Arab peace initiative. So
Mhm.
this is something. So as you said that this is. So how are you gearing up for different announcements? Did this one take you all by surprise, and now are you guys prepping for the rest? Tell us what's happening at American Muslims for Palestine in response.
So at American Muslims for Palestine, we released an official statement that could be seen on our website, but we weren't really, to say the least, amused by this at all. Unfortunately, the rhetoric that came out with it, and the way that it was pushed out, it seemed very hollow and empty.
Mhm.
From what we've seen and what we've said. Of course, the official statement of AMP could be found on our website. But speaking as an American organizer, a person surrounded by other American organizers, we've seen a lot of not to say surprise, but more disappointment than anything else. Like I said, that the UAE has had open relationships and has had a sort of relationship with Israel for a while. They also supported the deal of the century when it was announced. They were one of the first Arab countries to come out and support it. So we
How
see.
do they justify this? How do they? What is their justification? What do they say to Palestinians? Recently, there was a delegation of Palestinians that met with leadership in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and they assured Palestinians that the ties don't come at the expense of Ramallah, and Abu Dhabi still supports the establishment of a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem.
I mean, so of course, that's just going along with the lines that were drawn up during the deal of the century. that's going all along with the rhetoric that Israel's been giving. But I would add that it was also very telling that the UAE refused to speak to the Palestinian Authority beforehand. They weren't given a heads up that this was going to happen. They were doing it whether the Palestinian Authority liked it or not. Um, and of course, it makes sense. The fact that it came out, I think the day it came out, not many people saw it coming, but it wasn't surprising, if that were to make sense.
Mm.
But we've seen since this announcement, we've seen a lot of organization. Of course, this announcement comes straight from the annexation plan that Israel announced in July. As it comes straight from that, we've seen a lot of people stepping up against annexation and stepping up against this normalization. Of course, we many of us may know Congresswoman Betty McCollum. Congresswoman Betty McCollum put out one of the first bills in support of Palestine in the past. A few years back, she put out a bill that would help support Palestinian children and fight against the illegal targeting and the arrest and the jailing of them. After it actually came out in August as well, in early August as well. Congresswoman McCollum came out with a bill that is set to stand up and fight against annexation. This bill would penalize Israel for going through with annexation. So this bill is called the this bill is called I apologize. So this bill is called the Israeli Annexation Non-Recognition Act.
Okay.
It is the strongest bill to ever come out to stand against Israel in U.S. history. It's a bill that speaks clearly and justly about Palestinian rights. It's a bill that speaks clearly of what are the consequences if Israel were to go out and continue the annexation. This act would basically prohibit any U.S. funding to any area in the occupied West Bank that is annexed by Israel. And the Congresswoman was very clear that she believes that we deserve peace, security, equality, and justice. And she led this groundbreaking bill. Something that the amount of pushback on this and teeth on this bill hasn't been seen before in regards to Israel. And it started off with some very important support, names that we know in Congress. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, Mark Pocan, Ilhan Omar, Andre Carson, all signed on to this bill from day one. So it's a very important bill that has come out. And of course, the fact that it came out in the first place is important for us.
Yes,
People who are fighting.
That to have a bill like that is historic. For it to be introduced, for it to be shown. I mean, just to get it on the floor. That's so. Yes, we're going to. Yes, I think we have a supporter who knows the bill number HR 8050. Thank you, Malak. So tell us more about the details of this bill.
So as you stated, just circling around back around, the fact that this is even on the floor is important for us, because now we have saved into Congress and into the official congressional record that there is an amount of congressional Democrats and congressional representatives who are standing out against what Israel is planning to do. This bill's plan is of course to make sure that American money isn't used in this annexation, isn't provided as a support, and it's very clear in that. As well as that, the bill itself does a lot to promote equality. The significant language that's used in it is talking about human rights and equality and expressing Palestinian opposition to the Israeli occupation.
Exactly. McCollum said that Palestinians, Israelis deserve peace, security, equality, and justice. Annexation is antithetical to these goals. I reject Israeli annexation. I condemn annexation. I will work to ensure that the U.S. does not support, defend, or legitimize any plans to illegally annex Palestinian land.
Of course, and very strong words coming from a congresswoman who has always been a staunch supporter of human rights. As I said before, she was also the first congresswoman to release a bill in support of Palestinian rights in the past as well. And alhamdulillah, I would add, and this is, if there's a main point we need to take out of this, is even though all these problems are going on still in Palestine, and we're seeing annexation, and we're seeing, for lack of a better term, the selling out of people who are supporting us and or supposedly needing to support us, we're still finding ways to stand up for what we believe in is right. And we here in America, we live in the country that gives the largest amount of support and financial support to Israel. You know, we're the reason why they're able to make these deals with all these Arab nations. And it's important for us as Palestinians, as Muslims, as people who support justice in general. You know, we're here on Justice for All now. As people who support justice, we need to be able to use our privilege here in this country to be able to support our people around the world. And, you know, I know you guys have talked about many issues going on around the world, whether it be the Uyghurs, the Kashmiris, the Rohingya, and Palestine as well. But I'm saying now that we as people must use our privilege in this country to be able to fight for justice. And that takes me to my final point. We mentioned earlier, I work with American Muslims for Palestine. We're a national organization that educates and advocates for Palestine here in this country. AMP has been doing some tremendous work here in this country in education and advocacy. And we've seen since our beginning in the late 2000s, a shift in how America and the American view of Palestine has been going. We've been seeing more and more support. One of our flag mark or events is our Palestine Advocacy Day. This is an event that we've been doing for the past 5 years, where we bring people from all over the country to come support Palestine in Washington, D.C. What we typically do is we train, we educate, and give people the tools they need to be able to discuss with their, to be able to talk to their Congress people, to their representatives and their senators, and tell them that what they need in support of Palestinian rights. This year, initially, we were planning to do this event in March. It was planned out to be our largest event yet, but unfortunately, due to the COVID pandemic, we were unable to safely bring people to Washington, D.C. Instead, we have now pushed this event to September, inshallah. It will be from September 14th through the 18th, and it will be virtual. This is our first ever virtual Palestine Advocacy Day, and we're going out of our way to make sure that it is comfortable and easy for people to participate in. Day one, inshallah, is going to be our advocacy training sessions. Day two is going to be our congressional plenary. We showed that image a little bit earlier, where we have about 5 Congress people expected to speak, as well as some well-respected activists as well. So we're hoping, inshallah, that we will be able to mobilize our community to come out for this event. You know, we've been talking about these issues, and we do a very good job of identifying what our issues are, not only as Palestinians, but as justice seekers in general. We know what our issues are.
Mohamad, so talk to us a little bit about this training, because I've heard a lot about it. what are the components of the training? I understand some of it is like a lot of lay people who've never done advocacy, who've never interacted with their congressional staff, never even thought that Palestine could even be discussed in a meeting with congressional staff. So tell us a little bit more about the trainings that you do, and tell us how has the Just Joe's meetings, how have they changed over the years?
So the training specifically is to equip people with the skills they need so that they'll be able to not only effectively meet with their representatives and meet with their lawmakers, but we also give them the tools for them to be able to effectively do it on their own. Initially, what we do is we talk about how to run a meeting, how to be able to be involved and be able to get your points across. And we talk specifically about the bills that were the bills and the different things that we're promoting on that day and on the Hill. So, for instance, I spoke today about two bills that are very important to Palestine. For example, we would be able to use one of those and go into that in depth and be able to teach people how to talk about it and how to discuss it when on the Hill. As well as that, we pride ourselves in being able to give our community the ability to speak to their congresspeople. For the longest time, many people in the Muslim community, in the Arab community, weren't comfortable going to their lawmakers, weren't comfortable going to their congressional representatives. We pride ourselves in being able to give our people a voice and take them themselves to be able to do this. So, of course, for more information, please feel free to go on to PalestineAdvocacy.com. Check out our information. Check out what we have set. We have two full days of different trainings and our congressional plenary, and we definitely hope that you guys will be able to come and benefit from this event. Registration will be ending soon. We're trying to get as many people as possible. Please log on to PalestineAdvocacy.com for more information, inshallah.
When does registration end?
It'll be ending on the 8th, inshallah.
8th, inshallah. So, we talk about this a lot, and a lot of people, especially those who sometimes feel like, yes, other issues we can discuss with our Congress, but Palestine is something that is off the table. And this is something that I wanted to, share with us those changes. Just the fact that they're not Congress people who are coming to Palestinian events and are willing to speak. And there's just, more people who recognize that this is an issue that can be talked about, and are not falling for the one, narrative that IPAC has been sharing throughout, right? So tell us, I want to share some of those tidbits, those juicy, yes, that was a big change. We called this office and we actually got a meeting, instead of people oh, no one is available to meet with you. That sort of I know those changes are happening. So encourage our audience that get involved. This fight has been a really long fight. And now that things are progressing, we need to not stop here. We need to keep pushing. So share that with us.
So definitely. I remember the first time I came out to DC. I wasn't even 18 at the time. And I remember going to some offices and dealing with some people who, initially weren't understanding the points we wanted to bring up. When we first started coming, it's funny because we didn't even have bills that were in support of us, that were supporting us. We were going and asking them not to push more bills that were hurting us at the time. And now here we are pushing two bills in support of Palestinians. Now here we are with an actual Palestinian woman in Congress, the first Palestinian woman in Congress, and she was able to, get into Congress and do some amazing work. We also see that more and more people are willing to talk now, and that's something that's that's very surprising, because when we first started, the amount of people who wanted to talk about Palestine weren't much. Getting meetings isn't the hard part, but getting meetings where people are willing to listen more was very hard in the beginning. Now I feel that if we reach out to, if I personally am to reach out to my congressman, I'll get a meeting with him and he'll be involved in the conversation. And this is something that Palestinian activists around the country have been seeing.
And I just wanted to point out that when we say Palestinian advocates, you don't have to be a Palestinian to be a Palestinian advocate. Like, clarify that. A lot, I know here locally in my area, some of the biggest, most pushiest Palestinian activists are definitely not Palestinian. They're Jewish, they're Pakistani Americans, they're Black Americans, and it's just, that is like the most vibrant part of this advocacy work, that Palestinian activists may not be Palestinian.
Of course, surprisingly, because of the ties that we have as Muslims to this cause, we've always seen the most supportive religion in America to Palestine are the Muslims, 100%. And we've seen in the recent years, we've seen a growing amount of younger individuals of different backgrounds, of diverse backgrounds, whether they be Black, brown, white, Jewish. We've been seeing a growing amount of younger Americans coming out and supporting. There have been a lot of stats done that talk about how millennials are more likely to be supportive of Palestine, and now Gen Z is definitely the most supportive of Palestine. So we've been seeing a lot of push. We've been seeing a great amount of change. Right now, we're at a point in this country where we're talking about taking money away from Israel. This was rhetoric that was brought up by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's now being put into a bill by Congresswoman Betty McCollum. And so we need to be able to celebrate these victories. At the end of the day, these victories took dedicated individuals and a good amount of time. But we're seeing now that we're getting to the side where this is becoming more of a debate instead of us being just preached to. And we're getting to where we want to be. And the only way we could keep getting better is if we all come out and we all support as much as we can. That's why AMP is doing this virtual Palestine Advocacy Day, so that we as Americans can come out and show our support for the Palestinian people, no matter where we are. And this year, it's out of the comfort of our own homes. So definitely, we look forward to having as many people as possible, inshallah.
True, and so we've been doing a lot of these virtual advocacy, and it's so much easier now, because you don't have to fly out. You don't have to. You can actually just join in on a Zoom call or a phone call, a Senate line or a House line, and they just, and a lot of times people may be intimidated going into the offices, but here, when you're virtually doing it, you're free to speak your mind, you're free to demand. And the fact that a lot of younger folks are getting involved, which what I see is the demand is stronger. Like, the language that is used is not that, oh, please do this. I demand you to do this because you are my elected official. I helped elect you. So that's a shift, and we need to consistently push on that shift, because as our local one of our local elected official Congress people over here, Steny Hoyer, says, hey, this system is made to be lobbied. So that means anybody can lobby. That it's open to anybody, right? So that's the least we can do. So American Muslims for Palestine is doing all the hard work for you. They're getting the meetings. They're getting they've put everything together, and they're even going to train you. So all y'all have to do is get on the phone and get on those meetings. Now, if someone has not taken the training, can they still attend the meetings? Is that an option, or do they have to take the training before?
So we require anyone who's registered and planning to attend these meetings to join in the training. Unfortunately, the only way you'll be prepared is if you attend this training.
Okay, and tell
And
us why. Why do you feel that way?
because, of course, not only is it because of the bills that we're discussing and the issues that we're discussing, but it's also because you'll be able to get an insight into one who's going to be with you in these meetings. As well as that, it will also help to get some more background information on how your congressmen or how your senators have been acting towards this issue in the before. So there's a lot of detail that's going into these trainings. It's also being led by some amazing people. We have some representatives and some people from UNRWA USA, JVP, as well as the NAACP, who will be joining in and helping prepare our attendees for the upcoming meetings and to help support them as
You
well.
said something really important, which I really want to focus on. The fact that knowing where your congressperson stood beforehand,
Mm-hmm.
what their statements have been about this, calling them out on those statements, calling them out and saying, okay, that just shows that constituents are aware, they're watching, they're listening, and they're going to keep that in mind next time they go out and vote. So that is something, and for them not to take your vote for granted. Because that's another thing. And we had this discussion on the show earlier when Biden's team reached out, on the foreign policy issue, and then brought in the Muslim liaison instead of the foreign policy liaison to the meeting. And so that was something that we discussed here, that if we don't push now, and if we do not demand that these, Congress folks, people running for office, even running for president, should not take the Muslim vote for granted, or should not take up any vote for granted. That and these issues need to. And if we don't push now, and people are saying, oh, push for them now, and we'll hold their toes to the fire later. But I disagree with that. I feel like we need to push now so that we can hold their toes to the fire later. What are you going to ask of them if you do not make any asks right now, right? So what are you going to hold them to after they get elected? So that's something that I really wanted to. So that's the importance of the trainings, is for people to actually know. And then it also forms that bond. Like once you leave, right, and then that group of people that you went in to the meeting with, now you might not know them before. Now you can go back into your communities and organize and keep organizing for Palestine in your own areas, and coordinate with other folks who might be in your district, have the same congressperson. So that's super important as well.
Of course, definitely, inshallah. And like I said, this is going to be our largest one yet, and we're hoping as many people as possible can join in. Thankfully, it's at the comfort of your home, and it's only $10 to register. So, inshallah, hopefully, anyone watching will be able to benefit and come through and join us in supporting Palestinian rights here in America. For more information, again, go on to PalestineAdvocacy.com, and we look forward to seeing you all there.
So as we wrap up this hour, one thing that I did want to ask you about that was in development as well that I didn't have a chance was please explain to us what has happened with the Palestinian Authority and them cutting ties with Israel, which happened in May. What has transpired? What does that mean for the people on the ground?
So when we talk about the Palestinian Authority, it's very important to understand some of the context beforehand. The Palestinian Authority always had security coordination and an open relationship with Israel. They worked with them a lot, and they basically represented the Palestinian people with them. As they were continuously undermined, and all these announcements of annexation were coming out. the Palestinian Authority started taking away and refusing certain things. So there was a certain amount of money that Israel would be giving them. They refused to keep taking that, even though it was a large amount of their annual budget. So right now the PA is losing money because of this. As well as that, they've been stopping their security coordination. But of course, at the end of the day, as much as the PA can do, it's not it's not enough to stop Israel from continuing the occupation and continuing the oppression of Palestinian people or the upcoming annexation. But they're trying to do what they think they can, or what they have the ability to do. Of course, at the end of the day, Israel is continuing the occupation. They're still present in the West Bank, and they're still present in the areas that they plan to annex. So it's definitely something that the PA has been doing, but it's not something that's been showing results as of yet.
Mm. So this is, we're on the line. If anybody has any questions and they'd like to ask questions of Mohamad about the Advocacy Day, about the bill itself, or about stuff that is happening on the ground in Palestine, please do. Thank you all so much for watching. And, we're broadcasting on several Facebook pages. And this is, hopefully we'll be broadcasting this tomorrow on Muslim Network TV as well. So this is, and it's so important that we keep talking. Like, a lot of times people get, have issue fatigue. Mm-hmm. They're like, why do you keep harping on about the same issue over and over and over again? Or, why is it so important to keep talking about the recent developments? But this is like, where else are you going to see this? Like, we're not going to turn on ABC News and be having a conversation about Palestinian advocacy. Mm-hmm. That's not going to happen in the near future anytime soon, right?
Not yet, but hopefully.
Hopefully one day. One day we'll get there. So at least we need to continue to have these conversations, because it's, a lot of times when people keep informed and keep recognizing that things are changing and there isn't, like, a lot of people lose hope. So just like the positive achievements that have happened have to be highlighted too. Mm-hmm. And so just this bill, HR 8050, is just such a big, major accomplishment. And I congratulate you guys on that, because I know how hard it is to introduce a resolution or a bill into Congress, especially something as, as they like to call it, as controversial as Israel and Palestine. So this, as we wrap up the show, thank you again, Mohamad, for being here. Please go to PalestineAdvocacy.com and register. And inshallah, we are going to continue to call for support for this very important cause. As well as, please do visit Justice for All. We do have some exciting news. 3 political prisoners were released in India. Actually, 2 were released, and 1 is still awaiting bail. Dr. Kafil Khan has been released from prison in the Mathura jail in Uttar Pradesh, as well as Sharjeel Usmani, who is a PhD student at JNU University, who's been incarcerated. He was released on bail, and we're awaiting the news of Farhan Zuberi's. He's been granted bail, but has not been released yet. So I wanted to share that good news with you all. Thank you so much for joining us, and inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow. Peace out.